The sun slipped beneath the horizon on the 47th day of autumn, and it did not rise again. The sailors aboard the wooden vessel watched as the pale golden light faded into a gray line, then into nothing at all. For the next 4 months they would live in darkness, trapped in ice that had claimed their ship like a fist closing around a captured bird. The ancient mariners who sailed these northern waters knew that such things were possible. They had heard the stories from traders and fishermen who ventured too far north. But hearing a story and living inside it are two very different things. Tonight, you will learn what it meant to survive when the world forgot to bring back the light. Before you settle too deeply into this frozen tale, here is a gentle reminder. If you enjoy what you hear, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you truly want to. And as always, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your world. Now dim the lights, let your breathing slow, and drift with me into a time when sailors learned to dream without the sun. The year is somewhere in the early centuries of seafaring exploration, long before modern navigation or engines or radios that could call for help. The ship is called the Northern Star, a name given by men who believed that following the stars would always lead them home. The crew numbers 23 souls, each one chosen for strength, skill, and the quiet kind of courage that does not announce itself but simply endures. They set sail in late summer, chasing rumors of rich fishing waters and unexplored coastlines far beyond the known charts. The captain is a man named Eric, broad-shouldered and gray-bearded, with eyes the color of winter ice. He has sailed these waters for 30 years, longer than some of his crew have been alive. His hands are scarred from rope burns and frostbite, and his voice carries the calm authority of someone who has faced death many times and learned not to flinch. The men trust him completely, not because he promises safety, but because he never lies about danger. When Eric speaks, the crew listens with attention that borders on reverence. The first mate is a younger man named Anders, perhaps 35 years old, with quick hands and quicker thinking. He serves as Eric's right hand in all matters, translating the captain's broad decisions into specific orders. Anders has a gift for reading men, knowing who needs encouragement and who needs firm direction. The crew respects him differently than they respect Eric. Eric inspires awe. Anders inspires trust of a more personal kind. You feel the first hint of trouble 3 weeks into the voyage. The water begins to thicken, growing sluggish against the hull. Ice forms in the buckets overnight, and breath hangs in the air like small ghosts. Eric orders the ship to turn south, but the wind refuses to cooperate. It blows steadily from the wrong direction, pushing the vessel deeper into the frozen maze that stretches across the northern sea. Each day the ice grows closer, the channels narrower, until one morning the ship simply stops moving forward. The silence that follows is unlike anything you have ever heard. No creaking of timber against waves. No splash of water against the bow. Only the vast, empty quiet of a world held perfectly still. The ship sits locked in a field of white that extends to every horizon. The men gather on deck, their faces pale with understanding. They are trapped in ice that shows no sign of releasing them. A detail preserved in many old sailing logs enters your thoughts. Ships caught in Arctic ice during the age of exploration often remained frozen for months or even years. Some crews survived by adapting to the darkness and cold. Others did not survive at all. The difference often came down to leadership, preparation, and the quiet determination to keep hope alive when everything suggested despair was the only reasonable response. The Northern Star would need all three. Eric calls the crew together that first evening as the light fades toward what will become endless night. His voice is steady as he explains what they already know. The ice will not release them until spring arrives many months from now. They have supplies for perhaps 3 months if rationed carefully. The work of survival begins immediately. No panic spreads through the group. These are men who have faced storms, hunger, and injury before. They understand that fear helps nothing. The cook is an older man named Hans, weathered and patient, who has spent most of his life preparing food on ships that sailed to distant waters. He immediately begins inventorying the food stores, counting barrels and crates with methodical precision. His count reveals both good news and bad. They have more dried fish than expected, but less flour. The salt meat is holding well, but some of the vegetables have already spoiled from moisture. Hans presents his findings to Eric with the detachment of a man delivering facts rather than judgments. Thomas is the youngest member of the crew, barely 19 years old, serving his first voyage on a ship of this size. He watches the older men with wide eyes, trying to understand how they remain so calm when disaster has clearly struck. His hands tremble slightly as he helps secure loose equipment on deck. Anders notices and assigns him a specific task, something simple and concrete. The activity helps. Thomas discovers that doing something, anything, is better than standing still with fear. The first task is securing the ship against the crushing pressure of the ice. Men descend over the sides with wooden beams and ropes, building supports that brace the hull against the frozen walls surrounding them. The work is slow and dangerous in the cold that bites exposed skin within seconds. Fingers grow numb inside thick gloves. Breath freezes on beards and eyebrows, forming tiny crystals that sparkle in the fading light. But the bracing holds when tested, and the ship survives the first night of grinding pressure. A sailor named Peter takes charge of organizing the watches. He creates a rotation that ensures someone is always monitoring the ice, always listening for the sounds that might warn of dangerous pressure building. Peter is neither the strongest nor the most experienced man aboard, but he has a gift for organization that proves invaluable. His schedules become the backbone of shipboard life, providing structure when structure matters most. Inside the vessel, life reorganizes itself around new priorities that would have seemed strange just weeks ago. The galley becomes the warmest room, its small iron stove burning constantly with carefully rationed fuel. Men sleep in shifts, crowding together for warmth, their bodies arranged in patterns that maximize heat sharing. The smell of 23 men living in close quarters grows thick and heavy, but no one complains. Warmth matters more than comfort or dignity. Henrik is the ship's carpenter, a man whose hands seem to understand wood the way musicians understand their instruments. He begins a continuous patrol of the hull, checking for cracks or weaknesses that the ice pressure might exploit. His tools hang from his belt in a familiar arrangement, each one placed where his hands can find it without looking. Henrik speaks little, but his presence below decks provides reassurance. If something breaks, Henrik will fix it. The darkness deepens with each passing day as the sun sinks lower toward the horizon. At first, there are a few hours of gray twilight around midday, enough light to see the outline of ice formations and the distant horizon. Men use these precious hours for outside work, repairing damage and checking the supports. But that twilight shrinks steadily, like a candle burning down to its final stub. By the end of the first month, even noon brings nothing but a faint glow on the southern edge of the sky. Marcus is the oldest sailor aboard, perhaps 60 years old, with more voyages behind him than he can accurately count. He has seen ships trapped in ice before, though never for as long as this promises to be. His experience makes him valuable as a source of knowledge, someone who can answer questions about what to expect. Marcus speaks slowly and carefully, never exaggerating either hope or danger. The younger men gather around him during the dark hours, listening to his stories of past survivals. You lie in your bunk and listen to the ship settling around you in the absolute darkness. The timber groans softly as temperatures shift and wood contract. Somewhere above, ice crystals form and fall with tiny sounds like distant bells ringing in an empty church. The darkness presses against your eyes, so complete that you cannot tell whether they are open or closed. In this absence of light, the other senses sharpen to compensate. You hear every breath of your companions. You smell the smoke and salt and sweat that define this small world. A curious piece of polar survival wisdom surfaces in your memory from stories heard long ago. Sailors trapped in Arctic darkness often developed strict routines to mark the passage of time. Without the sun to divide day from night, the mind can lose its grip on reality. Some crews rang bells at regular intervals throughout the endless night. Others held meetings or assigned tasks according to a schedule maintained by the ship's clock. Structure became a lifeline, preventing the formless darkness from swallowing sanity itself. Eric establishes exactly such a routine, understanding its importance from experience and instinct. The ship's bell rings every 4 hours, dividing the darkness into manageable segments that the mind can grasp. Each segment has its assigned duties that must be performed regardless of whether anyone feels like performing them. Cooking, cleaning, maintaining the braces, checking for cracks in the hull. Even when there is nothing urgent to do, men are given tasks to occupy their hands and minds, mending clothes, sharpening tools, organizing supplies. Idleness, Eric understands, is the enemy of hope. William is the ship's navigator, though his skills have little use now that they are going nowhere. He redirects his talents toward record-keeping, maintaining a detailed log of each day that passes. His entries note the temperature, the condition of the ice, the health of the crew, the remaining supplies. The log becomes a kind of proof that time is actually passing, that they are not simply suspended in eternal darkness. William writes by lamplight, his pen scratching across paper in the otherwise silent hours. The cold intensifies as true winter settles over them with patient cruelty. Temperatures drop so low that metal burns exposed skin on contact. Water freezes in cups within minutes of being poured, ice forming from the surface downward. The ice around the ship groans and cracks with sounds like thunder, though no storm touches the motionless air. Some nights the pressure builds until the hull shudders and the men hold their breath, waiting to see if the supports will hold against forces they cannot control. So far, they always do. A younger sailor named James discovers that singing helps pass the time and lift the mood. His voice is not particularly beautiful, but it carries warmth that the stove cannot provide. Soon others join him, adding harmonies learned in different ports and different languages. The songs drift through the ship like heat, reaching even those who do not sing. Music becomes medicine, administered in regular doses to ward off the sickness of despair. Hans transforms the dwindling supplies into meals that feel almost generous despite their small portions. A thin soup becomes a celebration when served with care and ceremony. Dried fish and hardtack acquire new flavors when Hans adds herbs he salvaged from the summer months, hoarded for exactly such purposes. The men gather for meals like pilgrims approaching a shrine, grateful for every warm mouthful that slides down their throats and spreads heat through their bodies. One evening, as you sit near the stove with your portion of broth, Hans tells a story about a ship that survived 2 winters trapped in ice far to the north. The crew lived on seal meat and melted snow, he says. They built snow houses on the ice and burned whale oil for light when their lamp fuel ran out. By the time rescue came, they had forgotten what summer looked like, but they survived, every single one of them. His voice carries no drama, only the simple truth of endurance. The story becomes a kind of prayer, repeated in various forms as the weeks pass. Sleep becomes the crew's greatest comfort and greatest challenge as the darkness stretches endlessly. In the absence of light, the body loses its sense of when to rest. Men drift in and out of slumber at odd hours, their natural rhythms disrupted by the unchanging darkness. Dreams grow vivid and strange, filled with images of summer and warmth that feel more real than the frozen world around them. Waking from such dreams brings a sharp grief, the sudden return to cold and darkness hitting like a physical blow. A man named Frederick discovers a solution that spreads through the crew over the following days. He begins telling stories before sleep, long rambling tales of adventures and homecomings that guide the listeners gently toward rest. His voice is low and rhythmic, almost hypnotic in its steady cadence. The stories do not need to be true or even coherent in their details. They simply need to fill the darkness with something other than silence and fear. Within a week, the evening storytelling hour becomes as essential as the evening meal. The days blend together despite the careful routine Eric has established. Without sunlight to mark their passage, time loses its familiar shape and becomes something formless. Men begin counting by other measures that feel more real: the number of meals since they were trapped, the number of stories Frederick has told, the number of times Hans has distributed the increasingly meager rations. These numbers accumulate like beads on a string, each one a small victory against the formless dark. George is the ship's doctor, though his medical supplies are limited and his training was practical rather than formal. He monitors the crew for signs of illness or injury, knowing that in these conditions, small problems can become deadly. Frostbite is a constant concern, and he checks fingers and toes regularly, looking for the telltale white patches that signal frozen flesh. So far, the damage has been minor, caught early and treated with warmth and care. One night, perhaps 6 weeks into the captivity, something remarkable happens that breaks the monotony of darkness. A faint green glow appears in the sky, trembling and shifting like a living curtain of light. The aurora borealis dances above the frozen sea, its colors rippling from green to purple to pale rose. Men emerge onto the deck despite the brutal cold, their faces lifted toward the display. For a few precious minutes, the darkness retreats, replaced by beauty so unexpected it feels like a gift from the universe itself. The aurora becomes a regular companion as winter deepens its grip on their world. Its appearances are unpredictable, sometimes absent for weeks, sometimes painting the sky for hours on end. The men learn to read its patterns, noticing how certain colors seem to precede changes in weather. Some begin to see faces or figures in the shifting light, interpreting them as signs or messages from forces beyond understanding. Whether or not such interpretations hold truth, they provide comfort and meaning. Eric watches the aurora with the same calm attention he brings to everything in his command. He neither celebrates nor fears the dancing lights. He simply observes, adding this knowledge to the vast store of experience that has kept him alive through decades of sailing dangerous waters. When younger sailors ask what the lights mean, he shrugs and says, "They mean the sky is doing what the sky does." The answer is unsatisfying, but honest. Mystery does not require explanation to be appreciated. A system for exercising develops as the weeks pass and muscles begin weakening from inactivity. Men take turns walking the deck in groups, circling the ship despite the cold that bites through every layer of clothing. The exercise is brief but vital, keeping blood flowing and joints flexible. Some men develop their own routines below deck, stretching and moving in the limited space available. The body, they learn, must be maintained like the ship itself. The first serious crisis arrives in the 8th week with a discovery that sends fear through the crew. A section of the hull develops a crack, allowing seawater to seep into the lower hold in a thin but steady stream. The leak is small but persistent, and in temperatures this low, the water freezes almost immediately upon entering. Ice begins building inside the ship, adding weight that could eventually crush it from within. Thomas discovers the problem during a routine inspection, his lantern revealing the growing mass of frozen seawater glistening in the darkness. Eric organizes a response with swift efficiency that calms the rising panic. Men take shifts chipping away the ice with axes and chisels, while others work to patch the crack from inside using materials Henrik prepares. The repair is temporary at best. A proper fix would require materials and conditions they simply do not have. But the ice is cleared, the patch holds against the pressure, and the crisis passes. The victory is small but vital. It proves they can solve problems, adapt to challenges, and keep the ship alive. The rationing grows stricter as weeks stretch into months and supplies dwindle steadily. Hans recalculates the remaining food and delivers unwelcome news that no one wants to hear. At the current rate of consumption, they will run short before the ice releases them in spring. Eric makes the difficult decision to reduce portions further, knowing the cost in strength and morale. The announcement is met with grim acceptance rather than protest. Hungry men can still function, starving men cannot. Hunger becomes a constant companion, a hollow ache that never fully subsides no matter how much water they drink to fill their stomachs. Men dream of food now almost as often as they dream of sunlight. Conversations turn repeatedly to meals remembered from home, feasts described in loving detail, tastes and smells conjured so vividly that mouths watered despite empty stomachs. These shared memories become a form of sustenance themselves, nourishing spirits that bodies cannot fill. One day, Henrik the carpenter suggests hunting as a solution to their food shortage. The ice around the ship is not empty, he points out. Seals sometimes appear at breathing holes in the frozen surface. Birds occasionally pass overhead even in winter. If they could supplement their stores with fresh meat, the rations might stretch further and provide nutrients the preserved food lacks. Eric considers the idea carefully before approving a small hunting party to make the attempt. The hunting expedition requires courage of a particular kind that differs from sailing courage. The ice is treacherous, riddled with hidden cracks and unstable patches that could swallow a man without warning. The cold is brutal beyond anything the men have experienced, even inside the ship. And the darkness makes navigation nearly impossible, with no landmarks visible beyond the small circle of lantern light. The hunters carry lanterns, ropes, and improvised spears, setting out with instructions to return before the next bell, regardless of success. They find nothing on the first expedition, returning empty-handed and discouraged. The second expedition yields the same result, as does the third. But on the fourth attempt, a seal appears near a breathing hole, perhaps half a mile from the ship. The hunters approach slowly, moving with patience learned from desperation and weeks of failure. The kill is quick when it comes, the animal dispatched before it can escape into the water below the ice. They drag the carcass back to the ship, where it is greeted with more celebration than any treasure. Fresh seal meat transforms the mood of the crew in ways that seem almost miraculous. Hans prepares it carefully, stretching the precious resource across multiple meals to maximize its benefit. The fat provides essential calories that the preserved stores lack. The organs contain nutrients that have been missing from their diet for months. Men who were growing weak and listless begin to revive, color returning to pale cheeks. The success also proves that survival is not just a matter of passive waiting. They can act, hunt, and provide for themselves. The hunting parties continue whenever conditions allow, becoming a regular part of shipboard routine. Not every expedition succeeds, but enough do to make a meaningful difference in the food supply. The hunters develop techniques, learning to read the ice and predict where seals might appear. They share their knowledge with others, creating a growing expertise that increases their chances. The fresh meat becomes something to look forward to, a break from the monotony of dried fish and hardtack. A sailor named Robert falls ill as winter reaches its deepest and coldest point. His cough started small but has grown worse with each passing day, rattling in his chest with each labored breath. There is no physician aboard with formal training, only George who knows some basic remedies and the collective wisdom of men who have nursed each other through sickness at sea. They keep Robert warm, feed him extra broth from their limited supplies, and take turns sitting with him through the long, dark hours. The illness spreads fear through the crew in ways that cold and hunger have not accomplished. Disease in close quarters can devastate a group faster than any external threat. Men begin watching each other for symptoms, maintaining slightly more distance than before, washing hands more carefully with the limited water available. The fear is rational, but corrosive, threatening the unity that has held them together. Eric addresses it directly, reminding the crew that they have survived too much to be defeated by a cough. Robert will recover. They will all recover. Robert does recover, slowly, his strength returning over the course of 2 difficult weeks. The relief that follows his improvement ripples through the ship like warmth from a suddenly rekindled fire. Men who had grown silent and withdrawn begin talking again. Small jokes return to conversations that had become grimly practical. The crisis, having passed, leaves behind a strange gift, proof that even sickness can be survived in these impossible conditions. The halfway point of winter arrives without ceremony, marked only by William's careful calculations in the ship's log. He estimates that they have been trapped for approximately 2 months, meaning roughly 2 months remain before the sun returns to their sky. The number feels both encouraging and daunting at the same time. They have survived this long against all expectations. They can survive equally long again. But the supplies continue dwindling, and the men continue weakening, and the ice shows no sign of releasing its grip. Eric begins spending more time on deck, alone, watching the darkness that surrounds them endlessly. The crew notices his solitary vigils, but does not comment or question. Leadership carries burdens that cannot be shared, calculations that must remain private, doubts that would poison morale if spoken aloud. When Eric returns below to the relative warmth of the ship, his face reveals nothing of his thoughts. He discusses plans, issues orders, and maintains the steady presence that holds the crew together. Whatever weighs on him in those solitary hours stays with him alone. A discovery brightens the 10th week with unexpected good news. One of the hunters notices something glinting on the ice surface about 100 yards from the ship. Investigation reveals a deposit of fresh water frozen in a natural basin, likely collected from summer rain or melted snow before the deep freeze set in. The water is cleaner and fresher than their stored supplies, which have grown stale and slightly brackish despite careful management. Harvesting it becomes a regular task, adding variety and quality to their limited water supply. The cold reaches its absolute peak around the 12th week, temperatures dropping to levels that seem almost impossible. The air itself seems to crystallize, each breath visible as a thick cloud of ice particles. Breathing becomes painful, each inhalation a small wound in the lungs that never quite heals. Men venture outside only when absolutely necessary, their faces wrapped in every available layer of cloth. Even inside the ship, frost forms on surfaces close to the outer walls. The stove burns constantly, its small heat a tiny flame against an ocean of cold. Sleep patterns shift again as the cold intensifies beyond previous experience. Men sleep longer but less restfully, their bodies expending energy just to maintain warmth through the unconscious hours. Dreams become vivid and often disturbing, filled with images of being buried in snow or lost in endless white landscapes. Some men wake screaming from nightmares, then apologize for disturbing others. No one complains about the disturbances. Everyone understands the pressure they are all under. Frederick's storytelling hours grow more important as the cold deepens and spirits falter. His voice becomes a lifeline, a thread of humanity connecting the crew to the world beyond their frozen prison. He tells tales of every kind: adventures on distant seas, romances in warm ports, comedies that seem almost absurd in these conditions, tragedies that somehow provide comfort through shared tears. He invents stories when he runs out of remembered ones, his imagination providing what memory cannot. One night, Frederick tells a story about a ship that sailed so far north it reached the very edge of the world. The crew found a land of eternal summer hidden beyond the ice, where flowers bloomed year-round and the sun never set. They stayed there for a year before returning home with incredible wealth and tales that no one believed. The story is obviously fantasy, but it serves its purpose perfectly. Men fall asleep smiling, dreaming of warmth they can almost feel. The aurora makes its most spectacular appearance around the 13th week of their captivity. The entire sky blazes with color, ribbons of green and pink and violet dancing from horizon to horizon in patterns that seem almost intentional. The display lasts for hours, so bright that it casts faint shadows on the ice below. Men stand on deck until their feet go numb and their faces ache from cold, unwilling to look away from such beauty. Some weep without embarrassment. Beauty, in this place, is a form of salvation. Eric stands among his men, watching the lights with the same steady gaze he brings to everything. When the display finally fades into darkness again, he speaks quietly to those nearest him. He says the aurora is the sky's way of reminding them that the world is larger than their troubles. The ice will not last forever. The darkness will not last forever. Everything changes, even things that seem permanent and eternal. His words spread through the crew like warmth from a shared fire. Charles is the youngest hunter, barely 20 years old, but he has developed remarkable skill at reading the ice and predicting seal behavior. His success rate exceeds the older hunters, a fact they acknowledge with good-natured respect rather than jealousy. Charles attributes his skill to patience, the willingness to wait motionless in brutal cold for hours until the right moment arrives. The waiting, he says, is the hardest part. The actual kill is easy once you have mastered the waiting. The first hint of returning light appears in the 14th week, so faint that some men miss it entirely. A pale glow on the southern horizon, barely visible, lasting only minutes before fading back into darkness. The change is so subtle that it might be imagination or wishful thinking. But those who see it pass the news with restrained excitement that spreads through the ship. The sun is coming back. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. The darkness is beginning to break. The psychological effect of that faint glow exceeds its actual illumination by an enormous margin. Men who had grown quiet and withdrawn begin talking more freely. Plans for the future, previously avoided as too painful to discuss, become topics of eager conversation. What will they do when they reach home? What meals will they eat first? Who will they embrace? The questions no longer feel like torture. They feel like promises waiting to be kept. A second seal is killed in the 15th week, its meat arriving just as the supplies from the first kill are exhausted. The timing feels almost miraculous, though Eric points out it is simply the result of persistent hunting. Luck, he says, favors those who keep trying. Skill creates opportunity that luck can then reward. The fresh meat extends their provisions, buying precious days that might make the difference between survival and starvation. Edward is the ship's blacksmith, though his forge has been cold since they became trapped. He redirects his skills toward maintaining the tools and equipment that the hunters need. His strong hands reshape bent metal, sharpen blades, and repair damage that would otherwise render equipment useless. Edward works by lamplight in the cold hold, his breath visible as he hammers and files. The work keeps him sane, he says. Idle hands invite dark thoughts. The ice begins showing signs of change as the 15th week progresses. Cracks appear that were not there before, patterns shifting as temperatures rise imperceptibly. The pressure on the hull eases slightly, the groaning sounds growing less frequent and less intense. These changes are small, barely measurable by any standard, but the men notice them with the sensitivity of prisoners watching their cell door for any sign of weakness. Hans recalculates the supplies once more at Eric's request. His assessment is cautiously optimistic for the first time since the crisis began. If the warming continues, if the hunting stays successful, if no new disasters occur, they might have enough to survive. The word might hangs in the air, not quite certainty but closer than anything they have felt in months. Men nod thoughtfully, understanding that survival remains conditional, but the conditions seem increasingly possible to meet. The 16th week brings the first true twilight in months, light that actually deserves the name. The glow on the horizon expands, spreading color across the sky for nearly an hour. The light is still too dim to work by effectively, too brief to warm anything substantially, but it marks an unmistakable turning point. The sun is rising, not yet visible above the horizon, but climbing steadily toward it. The darkness is retreating. Men begin spending more time on deck, watching the brightening sky with eyes that have grown accustomed to darkness. The cold remains brutal, but the light makes it more bearable somehow. You can see your companions' faces now, really see them in something other than lamplight. The months of darkness have aged everyone visibly. Beards have grown wild and unkempt. Cheeks have hollowed from hunger. Eyes have developed a distant, watchful quality. But those eyes now hold something new and precious: hope. Samuel is the ship's sailmaker, his skills largely irrelevant while they remain frozen in place. He has spent the winter months mending clothes and making repairs to the fabric items that keep the crew warm. His needle and thread have become almost as valuable as Hans's cooking pots. Now, with departure becoming a real possibility, Samuel begins inspecting the sails that have been stored away for months. They will need repairs before the ship can move again. Eric orders preparations for departure to begin in earnest. The ship's rigging, neglected through the long winter, needs extensive repair. The sails require inspection and mending. Navigation equipment must be checked and calibrated after months of disuse. These tasks serve practical purposes, but they also serve psychological ones that Eric understands instinctively. Working toward departure makes departure feel real and achievable. Action creates belief where words alone cannot. A dangerous moment arrives in the 17th week, testing their growing confidence. A sudden warming trend causes ice near the ship to shift unexpectedly and violently. One of the support beams snaps under the pressure with a sound like a gunshot, and for several terrible minutes the hull groans and tilts at an alarming angle. Men scramble to reinforce the damaged area, working in conditions that combine desperate urgency with extreme cold. The repair holds when tested, but the incident reminds everyone that they are not safe yet. The near disaster changes the mood aboard ship significantly. The cautious optimism of recent weeks gives way to anxious awareness of continuing danger. They are so close to survival, but close is not the same as certain. Every creak of timber, every groan of ice becomes a potential threat demanding attention. Sleep grows difficult again as men lie awake listening for sounds of impending catastrophe that might come at any moment. Eric addresses the crew with unusual directness after the near disaster. He acknowledges the danger they continue to face. He admits that the next few weeks will test them as severely as the darkest days of winter tested them. But he also reminds them what they have already survived against all odds. 3 months of darkness, brutal cold that should have killed them, hunger and illness and isolation that would have broken lesser men. Men who have endured all that can endure whatever remains. Walter is the oldest hunter, nearly 50, with experience that compensates for strength that has begun to fade with age. He teaches the younger men everything he knows about tracking and patience and reading animal behavior. His lessons become a kind of school on the ice, practical education that might save lives someday. Walter takes obvious pride in his students' progress, especially Charles, whom he considers the best natural hunter he has ever trained. The 18th week brings the moment everyone has been waiting for through long months of darkness. The sun rises above the horizon for the first time in 4 months, a pale golden disk that hovers briefly before sinking again. The duration is perhaps 15 minutes, hardly enough to warm anything, but the effect on the crew is profound beyond measure. Men weep openly without shame. Some fall to their knees in gratitude. Others simply stand and stare, faces lifted toward the light like flowers following their source. Eric allows a celebration that evening, the first real celebration since they became trapped. The remaining supplies are stretched to create something approaching a feast through Hans's careful preparation. Hans performs miracles with the limited ingredients, producing a meal that feels almost luxurious by their reduced standards. Men eat slowly, savoring every bite, talking and laughing in ways they have not for months. The celebration is modest by any normal measure, but normalcy has long since lost its meaning. The days grow longer with surprising speed after that first sunrise. Each day the sun climbs a little higher, stays a little longer above the horizon. The ice around the ship begins changing more visibly, its surface darkening as it absorbs warmth, small pools of meltwater forming in depressions. The groaning sounds shift in character from ominous pressure to promising movement, evidence that the ice might eventually release them. Hunting improves dramatically as wildlife returns to the area with the increasing light. Seals become more common near their breathing holes, easier to find and approach. Birds appear in the sky, their calls strange and welcome after months of near silence. The hunters bring back meat regularly now, supplementing stores that would otherwise have run dangerously low. Hans prepares the fresh food with evident pleasure, his skills finally having proper ingredients to work with. David is the youngest member of the crew, barely 17, brought along as a general helper and learner. The winter has aged him more than the older men, stripping away the boyishness that remained when they set sail. He works alongside the experienced sailors now with quiet competence that earns their respect. David speaks little about his transformation, but his eyes have changed. They hold knowledge that cannot be unlearned. Hans recalculates the provisions one final time and pronounces them sufficient for the first time without qualification. If the ice releases them soon, they will not starve before reaching home. The announcement brings quiet satisfaction rather than wild celebration. The men have learned not to celebrate victories prematurely. But the knowledge settles into them like warmth, easing tensions that have accumulated over months of uncertainty. The 20th week brings a development no one expected or dared to hope for. Another ship appears on the horizon, its sails visible against the brightening sky like a vision from a dream. For a moment, the crew of the Northern Star can only stare, uncertain whether to believe their eyes. Ships in these waters at this time of year are rare beyond calculation. The appearance feels almost supernatural, a dream too perfect to be real. The approaching vessel is a rescue ship sent from home when the Northern Star failed to return by expected date. The captain, a man named Olaf, who served with Eric years ago, had argued for the search mission and insisted on leading it himself despite the dangers. His crew includes experienced ice sailors who navigated carefully through the same maze that trapped the Northern Star. They have been searching for weeks, following clues and educated guesses until finally spotting the stranded vessel. The reunion between ships is emotional beyond anything words can capture. Men who have spent months in isolation suddenly find themselves surrounded by fresh faces, new voices, news from a world they had almost forgotten existed. Supplies are transferred immediately: fresh food, medicine, warm clothing, tools for repair. The physical needs are met quickly, but the psychological impact takes longer to absorb. They are no longer alone. Eric meets with Olaf in the captain's cabin, two old friends reconnecting after months of separation that felt like years or lifetimes. They discuss the situation quietly and professionally, assessing the Northern Star's condition and planning the journey home. The ship can sail, Eric believes, once the ice releases it completely. The hull damage is repairable with the supplies Olaf has brought. The crew, though weakened by their ordeal, is functional and determined. With Olaf's ship accompanying them, the return voyage becomes a reasonable prospect rather than a desperate gamble. Richard is Olaf's first mate, a man of similar experience and temperament to Anders. The two first mates work together easily, coordinating the transfer of supplies and the repair efforts. Their cooperation demonstrates something important. The skills and habits that allowed the Northern Star's crew to survive are the same skills valued throughout the sailing community. They are not broken men who need to be carried home. They are sailors who faced disaster and prevailed. The ice begins breaking up seriously in the 21st week. Large cracks appear, spreading like veins through the frozen surface. The sound of grinding and cracking fills the air almost constantly now, a symphony of liberation. One morning, the ship shifts suddenly, dropping several inches as the ice beneath it separates from the ice beside it. The movement is alarming but promising. The frozen prison is finally loosening its grip. Preparations for departure intensify to fever pitch. Every man who can work does so, repairing sails, securing cargo, reinforcing weakened sections of hull. The activity generates its own kind of warmth, the warmth of purpose after months of mere endurance. Even the weakest crew members find tasks they can perform, refusing to watch idly while others labor. The ship transforms day by day from a prison into a vessel capable of sailing. The final release comes on a bright afternoon in what would be early spring by the calendar. A channel opens in the ice, narrow but navigable, leading toward open water visible tantalizingly in the distance. Eric orders the sails raised for the first time in months, and the Northern Star moves under its own power. The sensation is strange and wonderful, the ship responding to wind and wheel after so long held motionless. Timbers that had forgotten their purpose remember. The journey through the ice field requires careful navigation that tests Eric's skills. Olaf's ship leads the way, its crew watching for obstacles and signaling safe passage through the maze. The Northern Star follows closely, responding sluggishly at first as systems long dormant remember their functions. Ice scrapes along the hull with sounds that make men wince, but the channel holds, widening as they progress toward the open sea. Open water arrives like a revelation that brings tears to hardened eyes. The ship surges forward as the ice falls behind, waves actually rolling beneath the hull for the first time in 4 months. Men who have not felt the motion of sailing since autumn find themselves adjusting their stance, rediscovering balance they had nearly forgotten. The sensation is almost overwhelming, ordinary movement transformed into miracle. The voyage home takes several weeks, slowed by the Northern Star's weakened condition and the need for caution after months of ice damage. Both ships travel together, their crews sharing meals and stories, the isolation of winter giving way to the companionship of return. The weather cooperates, providing steady winds and calm seas that feel like blessing after everything that came before. Philip is the ship's chaplain, though his role has been informal throughout the voyage. He leads a service of thanksgiving as the ships enter familiar waters, words of gratitude that resonate with men who have learned to appreciate every small mercy. The service is not elaborate or lengthy. Simple words suffice when hearts are full. The men bow their heads and remember those who have died on other ships, in other winters, without the fortune that preserved them. Land appears on the horizon on a morning of particular clarity, the coastline rising from the sea like a dream made solid. Men crowd the deck, pointing and exclaiming, some laughing, some weeping, all feeling the same overwhelming mixture of relief and joy. Home. The word carries more weight than it ever has before. Home is not just a place, it is proof of survival. The harbor approaches slowly, details resolving as the distance shrinks with each passing hour. Buildings become visible, then people, then individual faces of those waiting on the docks. Word of the ship's return has preceded them by fast messenger, and a crowd has gathered to welcome the survivors home. Families search for familiar faces among the crew. Shouts of recognition rise from shore and ship alike. The Northern Star docks with careful precision, Eric guiding his vessel one final time into the embrace of the harbor that sent them forth. The gangplank drops with a sound that echoes across the water, and men begin descending to solid ground they have not touched in nearly a year. Some walk steadily on legs that remember land. Others stumble, their legs uncertain after months of ice and ship. All are met with embraces and tears and questions too numerous to answer. Margaret is Eric's wife, waiting on the dock where she has waited every time he has returned from every voyage for 30 years. Her hair has grayed further in his absence, and her face shows the marks of months of worry. But her embrace is strong, her voice steady as she welcomes him home. They stand together for a long moment, not speaking, simply existing in the same space after so long apart. Eric is among the last to leave the ship, his duty holding him aboard until every man has safely departed. He stands at the rail for a long moment, looking back at the vessel that kept his crew alive through impossible conditions. The Northern Star shows her wounds, patches on the hull, rigging hastily repaired, wood darkened by months of ice and stress. But she floats. She sailed. She brought them home. Olaf joins him at the rail, and the two captains stand in comfortable silence. No words are necessary between men who have shared the sea's dangers for decades. They simply watch as crew members reunite with families, as the crowd celebrates the return of those given up for lost. The scene is chaotic and beautiful, life in all its messy abundance. You step onto the dock and feel solid ground beneath your feet for the first time in months. The sensation is almost painful after so long. Leg muscles protesting against stability after months of adjusting to ice and timber. Someone rushes toward you, a face from the life you lived before winter, arms opening for an embrace you return with all the strength left in your body. The days that follow blur together in a different way than the dark days did. Instead of sameness, there is variety that feels almost overwhelming. Hot food in abundance, soft beds with actual mattresses, daylight that lasts for hours and hours, conversations with people who do not know what you have survived, who ask innocent questions about the voyage, who cannot quite understand the answers you give. The crew of the Northern Star becomes something like family in the weeks after return. They gather regularly, drawn together by experiences that outsiders cannot share. They tell stories, laugh about moments that seemed unbearable at the time, remember the darkness and cold with something approaching nostalgia. The bond formed in darkness does not dissolve in light. If anything, it strengthens. Thomas returns to his family's fishing business, applying the mathematical precision that calculated survival rations to the calculation of catches and prices. He prospers modestly over the following years, never forgetting the lessons of scarcity that winter taught him. Every winter, he sends anonymous packages of food to families he knows are struggling, remembering what hunger felt like and refusing to let others feel it if he can help. Olaf opens a small restaurant near the harbor, serving simple food prepared with the care he learned during months of making something from nothing. His establishment becomes famous for making even the plainest ingredients taste extraordinary. Customers never quite understand his secret, and he never explains. Scarcity taught him to honor every morsel. Abundance has not untaught the lesson. Frederick continues telling stories, his reputation growing until he becomes something like a professional storyteller. He travels between villages, entertaining crowds with tales that grow more elaborate with each telling. The story of the Northern Star becomes one of his most requested performances, though those who lived it sometimes protest his embellishments. He always smiles and says that truth is just the skeleton. Story is the flesh that makes it live. Henrik establishes a shipyard, building vessels designed to better withstand ice pressure. His innovations spread through the shipbuilding community, saving lives for generations. The support beams that held the Northern Star together become the basis for improved designs that make Arctic exploration safer. Henrik never speaks of his work as legacy. He simply builds, one ship at a time. Peter becomes a merchant, traveling the same waters that nearly killed him, but now as a trader rather than a sailor. His organizational skills serve him well in business, and he maintains connections with former crewmates scattered across the ports. Peter hosts annual gatherings where survivors share meals and memories, keeping the bonds of winter alive. George studies medicine formally after the return, determined to be better prepared for future emergencies. He becomes a ship's doctor of considerable reputation, serving on vessels that explore the very waters where the Northern Star was trapped. His experience makes him invaluable in crisis, calm when others panic, resourceful when supplies run short. James continues singing, his voice growing stronger and more practiced with time. He becomes known in harbor taverns for songs that carry unusual warmth and meaning. Some of his songs tell the story of the winter, transformed into verses that strangers can share. Music, he learned, is a form of survival. Marcus retires to a small cottage near the sea. His voyaging days finally ended. Younger sailors visit him regularly, seeking his wisdom about surviving the impossible. He shares what he knows freely, understanding that knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. His stories become part of the community's inheritance. Charles becomes one of the most successful hunters in the region, his skills developed during the desperate winter serving him well in peacetime. He teaches others what Walter taught him, passing along the patience and precision that saved lives. Charles speaks often of Walter, keeping his mentor's memory alive through practice. Anders takes command of his own ship within a few years, his experience under Eric's leadership preparing him for the responsibility. He captains with the same calm steadiness he learned from watching Eric through the darkest months. His crews trust him completely, not because he promises safety, but because he never lies about danger. William publishes his log of the winter, a detailed account that becomes important reading for anyone planning Arctic voyages. His careful records of temperatures, conditions, and survival strategies save lives by preparing others for what they might face. William finds satisfaction in knowing that his habit of documentation has purpose beyond his own memory. Eric retires from sailing shortly after the return, his body finally acknowledging the accumulated toll of decades at sea. He spends his remaining years in a small house near the harbor, watching ships come and go, occasionally visited by crew members who want to share news or simply sit in the presence of the man who saved their lives. He never speaks of the winter as an accomplishment, only as something that happened, was survived, and passed. The story of the Northern Star spreads through ports and taverns across the region, growing with each retelling. Some versions emphasize the hardship and suffering. Others focus on the rescue and reunion. A few claim supernatural elements, suggesting that the aurora protected the crew or that spirits guided them through the darkness. The true story is simpler and more remarkable. Ordinary men faced extraordinary circumstances and chose to keep living. Years pass, then decades. The original crew ages, some dying of old age, others of various misfortunes, a few simply disappearing into the vast world that spread beyond the harbor. But the story survives them, passed from sailor to sailor, generation to generation. It becomes part of the collective memory of the seafaring community, proof that survival is possible even when the sun disappears. You think about that winter sometimes, in the quiet hours before sleep claims you. The darkness that seemed endless but eventually ended. The cold that penetrated everything but never quite reached the core of life. The hunger that gnawed constantly but never completely consumed. But also the stories that filled the darkness. The warmth of bodies pressed close together. The beauty of the aurora dancing across the sky. The moment when the sun finally returned and everything changed. The survival of the Northern Star was not a single moment of heroism, but a continuous choice repeated thousands of times across months. The choice to keep the fire burning when fuel was scarce. The choice to share rations fairly when taking more would be easy. The choice to tell stories that made the darkness bearable. Each small choice accumulated into something larger, a collective act of defiance against circumstances that might reasonably have destroyed them. The ancient mariners who sailed these waters understood something that modern comfort sometimes obscures. Survival is not guaranteed. Light is not permanent. Warmth must be created and maintained. Community is not automatic, but must be built through endless small acts of care. These truths feel distant in seasons of abundance, but become unavoidable in seasons of scarcity. The Northern Star was eventually repaired and returned to service, sailing for another 15 years before being retired. Her timbers, strengthened by the experience of surviving ice, carried other crews through other dangers. When she was finally broken up, pieces of her wood were kept as relics by sailors who knew her story. Some of those pieces still exist, passed down through families, tangible connections to an impossible winter. The harbor where the crew returned still exists, though it has changed beyond recognition over the centuries. Modern ships pass through waters that the Northern Star once sailed, their crews knowing nothing of the wooden vessel that was trapped in ice so long ago. But the waters remember. The ice remembers. The darkness that falls each winter remembers all the ships and all the sailors who learned to wait for the returning sun. As you drift toward sleep tonight, comfortable in ways those sailors could barely imagine, you carry their story with you. The Northern Star waits somewhere in memory, frozen in ice, waiting for spring. Her crew huddles around the stove, sharing warmth and stories, watching for the aurora's dance. The darkness holds them, but it does not break them. They survive because they choose to survive, again and again, until choosing becomes unnecessary, because the sun returns. The lessons of that winter remain relevant even now. Patience when circumstances cannot be changed. Community when isolation threatens. Hope when despair seems reasonable. Action when action is possible. Rest when rest is needed. These simple truths carried 23 men through 4 months of darkness and brought them home alive. The sun always returns, though sometimes it takes longer than anyone expects. The ice always releases its grip, though sometimes patience runs thin before freedom arrives. The darkness always breaks, though sometimes it breaks the travelers before it breaks itself. The Northern Star's crew survived because they believed in eventually, even when eventually felt impossibly far away. Every sailor who ventures into northern waters carries the Northern Star with them, whether they know the story or not. The lessons learned during that winter have been absorbed into the culture of Arctic sailing, passed along through training and tradition. The specific names may be forgotten, but the wisdom survives. Prepare for the worst. Hope for the best. Endure whatever comes between. The families of the crew never forgot what they almost lost during that winter. The wives and children and parents who waited for months without news learned their own lessons about patience and hope. Their survival was different from the sailors' survival, but no less real. Waiting, too, requires courage. Uncertainty, too, must be endured. Margaret lived another 20 years after Eric returned, never taking for granted the daily presence she almost lost forever. Every morning she watched him drink his tea. Every evening she listened to his stories. Every night she felt grateful for his breathing beside her. The winter taught her that ordinary moments are not ordinary at all. The children of the crew grew up with the story as part of their heritage. They learned early that their fathers had faced death and chosen life, that survival was possible through determination and cooperation. Some followed their fathers to sea. Others chose different paths. All carried the knowledge that their existence was not guaranteed, that it had been purchased through months of struggle. The rescue ship and its crew received less attention in the tellings, but their contribution was essential. Without Olaf's insistence on searching, without his crew's willingness to risk the same ice that trapped the Northern Star, the story would have ended differently. Rescue is as heroic as survival, though it makes for less dramatic narrative. The authorities investigated the voyage upon the crew's return, seeking to understand what went wrong and how similar disasters might be prevented. Eric testified calmly, describing the conditions and decisions without seeking to blame or excuse. His account became part of official records, studied by those who planned future expeditions into Arctic waters. Some of the crew struggled with the return to ordinary life. The intensity of survival created bonds and habits that peacetime could not sustain. A few found themselves restless and dissatisfied, unable to care about concerns that seemed trivial after facing death. These men eventually found their way back to sea, seeking dangers that made them feel fully alive. Others embraced ordinary life with renewed appreciation. Every meal tasted better after months of hunger. Every warm bed felt like luxury after sleeping on ice. Every sunrise carried beauty that had been invisible before the winter of darkness. These men became more present, more grateful, more aware of gifts they had previously ignored. The Northern Star's log was preserved and eventually donated to a maritime museum, where it remains available for researchers to study. William's careful entries provide one of the most detailed accounts of Arctic survival from that era. Historians have analyzed his records, extracting insights about everything from nutrition to psychology. The songs James created during the winter survived as well, passing from singer to singer through generations. Some have been recorded in modern times, their melodies carrying echoes of desperate creativity. The words speak of cold and darkness, but also of hope and endurance. Music, it turns out, is as durable as memory itself. The annual gatherings Peter organized continued for decades, shrinking as original crew members died, but expanding as their descendants joined. By the 100th anniversary of the voyage, the gathering included great-grandchildren of the original sailors, people with no personal memory of the events, but a family connection to the story. The techniques Henrik developed for ice-resistant ships remained in use for generations, modified and improved, but fundamentally unchanged. His insight that flexibility could survive pressures that rigidity could not has applications far beyond shipbuilding. The principle echoes through engineering and life alike. The pattern of survival the Northern Star's crew developed has been replicated, knowingly or not, by survivors of other disasters throughout history. Structure and routine, shared resources and fair distribution, stories and songs to maintain morale, physical activity to maintain health, hope maintained through evidence, however slight. These principles appear again and again in accounts of survival against odds. Modern psychology has names for what the crew experienced and did. They maintained social cohesion. They established rituals. They created meaning. They practiced mutual support. They managed stress through activity and narrative. The science is new, but the wisdom is ancient. The darkness of that winter was not unique. Every winter brings darkness to the polar regions. What was unique was the presence of 23 men who refused to surrender to it. Their choice, repeated daily, created an outcome that circumstances alone would not have produced. They made their survival through will as much as through luck. The story ends where all survival stories end, with life continuing beyond the crisis. The men who returned from that winter lived their remaining years with knowledge that others lacked. They knew what they were capable of enduring. They knew the value of community under pressure. They knew that darkness always breaks eventually. You carry this knowledge now too, absorbed through the story, available when you need it. The winters of your own life may be different from theirs, but the principles remain the same. Patience, community, hope, action when possible, rest when necessary, and always, always the belief that the sun will return. The Northern Star is gone now, her timbers scattered and decayed, her crew long since passed to whatever awaits beyond life. But the story persists, as stories do, carrying truth through time. You have heard it tonight, and perhaps someday you will tell it to someone else, adding your voice to the chain of voices that keeps memory alive. The sun rose this morning, as it does every morning in this part of the world. You probably did not notice particularly, accustomed as you are to its reliable presence. But somewhere in the north, the sun is sinking toward a horizon it will not clear for months. And somewhere in memory, 23 men are waiting, surviving, enduring until the light returns. As the sun disappeared for months, archaic sailors survived afflicted. They survived hunger and cold and darkness. They survived isolation and illness and fear. They survived because they chose to survive, and because they chose to survive together. Their story is your inheritance now, part of the vast library of human endurance that proves what is possible when people refuse to surrender. The night is quiet around you as this story ends. Perhaps you are in bed, perhaps in a chair, perhaps somewhere else entirely. Wherever you are, warmth surrounds you. Light is available at the touch of a switch, and the darkness outside is temporary and familiar. These comforts are not guaranteed. The crew of the Northern Star would tell you that if they could. But they are available, and they are worth appreciating. Sleep is approaching now, the healthy sleep of safety that the crew often lacked. Let it come. Let your breathing slow and your muscles relax. Let the story settle into memory where it will wait until you need it. The darkness of sleep is not the darkness of winter. You will wake from it refreshed, as they eventually woke to spring. The last image to carry with you is the sun rising above the ice for the first time in 4 months. The pale golden disk hovering on the horizon. The faces of men lifted toward it, tears freezing on their cheeks. The knowledge that survival was no longer a matter of faith, but a fact. The sun returned. It always does. It always will. Thank you for sailing these frozen waters with me tonight. If you enjoyed the journey, consider subscribing so you can hear more stories like this one. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is in your world. Your presence here matters, part of the community that keeps these stories alive. And until next time, stay warm, stay patient, and remember that even the longest darkness eventually gives way to light. The ancient sailors wait in calm, as they always have, as they always will. And now, so can you. Good night and peaceful dreams.